Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. This week on the Sweetwater Minute, we are joined by virtuoso drummer Keith Carlock. Keith, thanks for coming in.
Thanks
Appreciate
for having
you being
me.
here.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
your time.
Thanks.
You're here. You did a workshop last night with Gretsch Drums.
Yes.
And you're here for the weekend working in the studio, correct?
Yeah, we're doing a workshop. And basically it's some guys that I play with from time to time, Tom Himby and Michael Whitaker and Adam Needy, all guys from Nashville that I've met over the years. And we're just doing this workshop and basically showing the recording process from the beginning to the end. Yeah.
Right. Nice. So you came up from Mississippi, correct?
That's where I'm from.
And then through North Texas State.
Exactly.
What drew you to New York as your base of operations?
I think I was always attracted to New York because it was the scariest place. I was intimidated by it, and I just wanted to take a risk. It was a time in my life where it felt like that's where I just connected with the city and took a chance and just went for it. And almost 20 years later, it's worked out great.
It worked out great for you. Yeah, really nice. So how did you work your way into your first gigs once you arrived there? Did you have a plan in mind, or did you just show up, or how did you approach that?
Yeah, I didn't really want to just show up, although you kind of do in a lot of respects. But I kind of tried to get in touch with people that I knew from school at North Texas that went before me, just to kind of let them know I was thinking about making the move, and they encouraged me to do it. And so people looked out for me. I think that's the cool thing about going to a college like that, because everyone's kind of hungry to get out and make something happen. And you help each other out, when you're friends. And so I think that was just the first step, is just getting there and staying in touch with people I already knew, and then they turned me on to people that they had met being there before me, and it just kind of snowballs. And I just got out and played as much as I could, in whatever situations, and just try to create a buzz and let people know I exist, that whole thing. And I ended up, the first gig that I got was through Blue Lou Marini, the sax player, and he hooked me up with the Blues Brothers gig. That was my first real, what felt like a kind of a break, and it was all the original guys from the movie with Steve Cropper and Duck Dunn and the horn section with Lou and Alan Rubin and all those guys, and it was mostly touring in Europe, and it was great. It was really a fun band, and I could connect with that music, being from the South, and then I kind of got involved with other things. I got the Harry Belafonte gig, which was completely different but very, very fun. I learned a lot. It's a lot of African music and Cuban kind of influences, and he kind of did a lot of different things, and so that was a great experience. And, and I got involved in the downtown New York scene, playing with Wayne Krantz, this guitar player, and I kind of pursued him in a way because I was a fan, and I would go to his gigs occasionally and just say, hey man, I'm, without being a pest. I was just like, I'd love to play, I'm a fan, and I know your music, and it just happened to be a good time where he was looking for a new band, and we got together and played, and then that turned into something really special. We had a trio that lasted for years. We still play, even to this day when we can. But so that was the Steely Dan connection, because Wayne worked with Steely Dan back in the mid-'90s on a tour. And so Donald Fagen and Walter Becker learned about me through that gig, and they would come out to the gigs every now and then, as would a lot of people. This trio created this buzz that was really magical, and a lot of people were coming down. Every night there was always some, somebody in the audience that I admired or something, And so that was really cool to create that scene in downtown New York, and that just kind of snowballed and led to all the other stuff, But I've been with Steely Dan now since touring since 2003. And recording before that. They asked me to do some recording in the late 90s, and it just kind of kept becoming more and more
starting
busy.
with Two Against Nature, right?
Two Against Nature, yeah. And then Everything Must Go was after that, and then I've done one of Donald's solo records called Morph the Cat, and Walter's Circus Money. So that's been an ongoing thing, probably the most steady reoccurring gig. And then in between tours with Steely Dan, I did a tour with Sting, and what else? James Taylor.
Yeah, James Taylor.
Yeah, James Taylor, John Mayer.
Right, lots of great stuff.
Yeah, it's been a nice little ride, the last few years.
Right, right. So those kind of gigs, it seems like it's as important that you're obviously very technically proficient, musically proficient, but it has to be a personality thing as well to kind of mesh in with all these different artists. When you take a gig like that, or you're called for a gig like that, how do you approach that? Do you go in thinking I'm just going to wait? Do you go in with I'm going to show them what I can do? How do you approach when you start playing that gig or auditioning for a gig like that?
Well, I gotta say, it was never an audition process. It was always just recommendation, or maybe they, heard me play in some situation or something and said, let's try that, try to get this guy and see what it's like, I guess. But I generally just try to just let the playing speak for itself. I really try to be really prepared and know the show, know the music as much as I possibly can, and just have a confidence that I need, that I know the music, and then the rest is just kind of learning how all the personalities work, and and just kind of adapt to what I need to adapt to, and that kind of people stuff, that's important, and just being a good vibe, a team player, and just kind of, I think that's key, is just really being a team player and you're joining a team. You're not there to be the star, It's just kind of, how is this going to work? How can we all make this the best it can be? And that's really how I approach it. And
so on these different gigs, do you approach the playing differently? I know you've done everything from Steely Dan to sessions for Faith Hill. Do you go in with the same style in mind, or do you adapt yourself to different sessions? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I just adapt to what I think the music needs, and I'm a fan of so many different styles of music, so I think the way that I play draws from all the things that I love,
Right.
So I think with most of the gigs that I've done, I've kind of been a fan of these artists already, and I know a lot about them and what I think makes the music work, and I just try to, go in with that in mind, and then approach it like I would also on top of that, like try to bring something new to it, and that has my own little slant on it.
Right.
Because I want to sound like me. I don't want to try to be what was before me, but I also want to, pay homage to what was before me too.
Right.
So, because those parts are important and those details are important.
Right. Right.
So,
does that extend to the sound that you get as well? Because one of the hallmarks of your playing and your sound is a very open drum sound with a lot of sustain. The drums really ring, particularly the kick drum. Do you modify that for different artists, or is that your sound that you go for?
Yeah, if I could get away with it all the time, I would, but it just doesn't happen, because not everybody loves that sound. I love it, and it's generally, people tend to associate that with me with the more instrumental music that I've done or been a part of, and it seems to work, especially in a guitar trio or a small band, that's just playing more open music, but it just doesn't work with Steely Dan or some of the other stuff that just needs to have a certain tightness and sound to it that is associated with that music. So it just wouldn't work, and they wouldn't like it. I wouldn't even try. So I know we're gonna stuff the bass drum and we're gonna muffle a little bit, and that's okay. That's the studio sound they're known for. So I just have to adapt to that. But so I like both. It changes the way that the drums feel, and
I would expect,
and the air that's moving around. It's very different. So, depending on what gig comes next, it's always kind of putting on another hat, sort of, just to kind of get back into what that feeling is like with the tuning. And
right. Is it mainly a tuning thing that results in that?
Yeah, generally tuning and adding a little muffling here and there. Yeah.
Right. When I watch you play, I've seen you play with Steely Dan and obviously various videos and things as well. Sometimes it seems like players try to muscle drums. They play really hard. It appears to me when I'm watching you that you play fast, that it's a velocity thing and you're coming off of the drum. How do you achieve a big sound? Is it a matter of hitting the drum hard? Is it a matter of your touch, or how does that come about?
That's a good question. I've worked on a way to get a big sound without hitting hard. It may look like I'm hitting hard because I'm using a lot of this kind of motion, but that's really just to get weight behind the stick itself. I'm not like bashing through. I'm more or less, it's more orchestral, and I'm kind of letting the stick rebound naturally, and it comes from some techniques that I studied years ago in school, and they kind of just became my own way of doing it, but it's just letting the stick do more of the work, and you're pulling the sound out as opposed to, you know, bashing into something, and it's just a different approach, you know. I don't say this is the way you got to do it, but this is what works for me, and I can definitely get a much bigger sound without having to muscle it, you know.
Yeah, right. It seems like it gives you more control over dynamics as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it seems like being able to get that, the velocity approach as opposed to the muscle approach seems to be much more sensitive, if you will.
Yeah, you know, but you know, I can rock out when I need to, of course, but but it's yeah, there's definitely, the dynamic range is a lot wider, and I can, I mean, you know, the sound is going to be not as harsh. It's not going to be as like coming at you in the same way, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
You know, like I like a more warm sound from the drums to the cymbals. You know, when it's harsh and just unpleasant, I don't think that's as musical. You know, but that's just my opinion, really.
No, well,
you know?
it obviously works. So that's great. That's great. So I'm a guitar player, and I know bass players will tend to cue in on the bass drum. But as a guitar player, and I think a lot of other guitar players, we tend to cue in on the hi-hat. And when I'm listening to you, it sounds like a lot of your groove is actually coming from the hi-hat, as opposed to the kick on 1, snare on 2, kick on 3, snare on 4. Is that something you're purposefully trying to do to drive that groove from there so you have more freedom with the other drums? Or is it just a way that evolved in your playing?
Probably a little bit of both. When I'm playing more, you know, grooves that are busier, meaning a lot more going on with the kick and snare, I think what holds it together, what's the glue, is just something really simple and steady on top of that. So that just kind of glues what's going on here together, whether it's the ride cymbal or the hi-hat, I think, is something I think about when I play. And just the blend of the whole kit, you know, just making sure everything is blended like a nice mix, you know, like I really am hoping that you know, translates into the music and to the listener, you know.
Right. So how can somebody develop that sense of groove? If they're a beginning drummer or somebody who's working on their chops, you have a very deep groove, you're known for that. Obviously you can do all the other stuff as well, and the musical playing and soloing. How does one really work on being able to set the groove behind the beat, in front of the beat, with different limbs and things?
I think for me it was just listening to a lot of records growing up and then playing along with them, and really just, even before trying to play it, like really training my ear to hear what it was about that sounded so good. What made it sound like that? Why does it feel so good, and why does it make me want to move and dance and grab my attention, you know? So then you just start getting into what the details are of what makes that happen, you know? And it's, a lot of it is the drums, but it's also how everything else in the rhythm section is working together with the drums, you know? So just kind of digging deeper and deeper into that stuff was always fun for me.
Sure.
And then just learning how it feels to lay it back a little bit, or to play more, you know, right in the middle, or a little edgier on top, like just knowing, just from doing it, like anything, a lot of repetition, but putting yourself in situations where you can really work on those different types of energies and attitudes, you know.
Right.
And then just being able to go there when you need to, if that's what the artist calls for, or it just, for instance, when I was working with Sting, it was very much more unnatural for me, but I had to really push things because that's what he needed, and that was the energy of the music.
Right.
And then, you know, Steely Dan is either more behind, or a lot of times it's right in the middle, you know. I'm just this layer that everything is kind of moving around on top of sometimes.
Right.
And I'm kind of that glue in the middle. It depends on the tune and the era, maybe. I think back in the 70s, there's a lot more, I guess, busier drumming happening, and anyway, for whatever reason. But yeah, I think it's just training your ear to hear it first, and then try to, once you know what that is, then try to feel it in your body, and you know, just where things need to be placed, and then just getting the consistency once you get there and just really working at it. And then you can play along to a click, of course, and work on tempos that are really slow or really fast or whatever's uncomfortable for you, and work on your weakness.
Yeah, that was my next question, was whether you recommend somebody working with a metronome to learn that kind of thing.
I think growing up, I didn't really have that option really. It wasn't as popular then, but nowadays you kind of have to be able to play with a click, because that's how everyone seems to record or want to record, and so they can do editing and things like that. I would prefer not to have a click, because I feel like I'm confident in my time. I'm human, so I'm not perfect, but I feel like it's strong enough, that it can work. So when I can get away with not having a click, I love that. But I think it's certainly something any young player should definitely work on, because it's going to happen in your career. You're going to have to play with a click. So, yeah, definitely. And for me, it was always, on the other side, growing up, I was always listening to records that had good time, and good feel. So just knowing when you can kind of be a little more slinky and loosey-goosey versus when the click is on, okay, maybe I can't do that as much because it may not work, depending on what the music is. And just that's another way of just adapting to what the music needs,
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. So you were here last night, you did a workshop on behalf of Gretsch, and you're using the Brooklyn drums, correct?
Yes, I've been using the Brooklyn drums since they came out last year. But actually on this clinic, I was using a USA Custom, and I kind of go back and forth between the two. So I like the sound of both. They just have little differences that kind of make them unique, but they're both great sounding drums, and I'm actually still deciding, which kit I like better. But the Brooklyns tend to ring a little more and have that open tone naturally. Whereas with the USA, it's a little more, the rims are heavier and more die-cast, kind of old school, Gretsch. And they both sound great. It's just the overtones are a little different and maybe not as much ring, which, some people will, depending on your taste, like less or more of that. So, but with both kits, you can get enough of either. They can start really open, or you can always muffle if that's your thing, So. But I'm loving the drums. They're to me the best sounding drums out there. They always have been. I've been a fan for a long time, and just happy to be playing them. And the new stuff is great too. It's not just the old vintage drums of Gretsch that are great. Those are great, but the new stuff is worth checking out.
Now too. Yeah. Oftentimes when I see you, you have two snare drums. You have a snare in the traditional place, and you have one over beside your hi-hat. Why do you do that?
Just to have a different sound. In a groove or in a track that you're playing on, or live, whatever it is, the snare drum can really change the feel of a song, and totally change the vibe. You just change that one voice, and so it's just to have another sound over there. I generally have my main snare as the more medium tension, my usual sound that I normally use. It's not muffled and it rings a bit, And then just to have a completely different contrast from there, I'll have a really deep, a much deeper, drum that's tuned way down low, and I put some muffling on it, some moon gel or something, or whatever works, and just to get a really thuddy, kind of, I always say it kind of reminds me of the Al Green, the Al Jackson Jr. sound from Memphis or something, the Stax thing that he would do sometimes, where it's really low and just beefy. And so then I also use a LP micro snare now too. So I have these three different, it's a really tiny, geek, 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 just high pitched, drum and bass sound thing. So it's just having those three sounds, it's kind of fun. And in a clinic situation like last night, or even live situations now, I tend to use mainly the main snare for most things, but just to have a contrast every now and then.
Do you use the auxiliary snares, if you will, for a complete beat, or do you just use them as an accent here and there?
It could be either. Sometimes I use it for the whole tune, because that just makes sense, not to change it sonically. It could be weird, or I just use them as accents or fills, like you say. It could be either one. I just make that choice. And
adds to the musicality even more.
It's cool.
more
It's
tonal
fun.
options.
It's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Keith, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
We're
Thanks, Mitch.
honored to have you in our studio, and thanks for taking the time to talk with us today. It's really been a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you very much. My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it very much.
Thank you, Mitch.
I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.